Jesus said our love should be perfect. Yikes. Sounds like a pipe dream, doesn't it? With some help from John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, we'll redefine what perfect love actually is and is not, embrace progress in perfecting our love, and navigate potential pitfalls when our love is less than perfect. Join Sycamore Creek for this 4-week series leading up to Easter, and you'll discover the path to a perfect love.
I didn't grow up Methodist or know anything about John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. I was hired into a United Methodist church right after graduating from Wheaton College because my wife already worked at Petoskey United Methodist Church. As I began working there, some of the older members told me that
I wasn't Methodist enough. I was too Baptist.
That was really weird because I had never even attended a Baptist church. So in an effort to get to know this church tradition I was now working for, I took an online class on John Wesley. Now this was the mid-90s, before streaming video, so a box of VHS tapes.
Yep, VHS tapes.
Showed up at my door with lectures from a John Wesley scholar. I watched them all in my pajamas and then logged onto Blackboard to participate in bulletin board discussions. At first I really didn't like John Wesley. In fact, I didn't like him at all. He was too focused on this thing called perfection. I knew I was a sinner and would always be one. Perfection was just way out of my league. But slowly and surely, Wesley won me over. I slowly realized that I believed that sin, that is brokenness, woundedness, and bondage, was stronger than God's grace. And when Wesley won me over, I began to see some significant changes in my life.
It's not like I lived in the gutter or something.
But I became more merciful and gracious slowly, patiently, little by little, over time, with baby steps. My commitment to serving the poor and the marginalized deepened. My commitment to economic and racial justice persevered. My experience of being vulnerable and authentic with fellow Christians grew. My love was being perfected. It didn't happen immediately, and it's still not done. But Wesley put me on the road of transformation. Today we begin a new series called A Perfect Love. It's part of a bigger series on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous teaching. We're on series 7 of 14.
Halfway there.
Looking at topics inspired by Jesus' sermon. Here's a taste of what we're doing.
It's time to go deep by going up the mountain. Spend time with Jesus' most well-known teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. Over 18 months, we're covering it all in 14 series inspired by Jesus' themes and topics, everything from enemies and relationships to money and prayer. So go deep by going up the mountain with Jesus and Sycamore Creek.
In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus makes a pretty big ask. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect.
What? How? What the f***?
John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, unexpectedly believed that this command of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount was possible to fulfill in this lifetime. In this series, we're going to explore what perfection is, what it is not, and what to do when your love isn't perfect. But today we'll start at the beginning with some history of John Wesley and the Methodists. John Wesley sounds so, formal. So let's just call him John. We've already heard it in a modern translation, but the theme verse through this whole series in the translation that John would have used, that is the King James Version.
If it was good enough for St. Paul, it's good enough for me.
Well, the King James Version says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father, which is in heaven, is perfect." John didn't just read the Bible in the King James Version, he read it in its original languages and was really proficient in Hebrew and especially Greek.
It's all Greek to me.
Let's look at John Wesley's life. He was born in 1703 in Epworth, England, into a devout Anglican family. Samuel Wesley, his father, was a priest, and Susanna Wesley, his mother, taught her children rigorous discipline and faith. In 1709, the Epworth Rectory caught on fire, and John was saved through a second-story window. This moment was seen by his family as a divine sign of his special purpose. He was a brand plucked from the burning. Eventually, John attended Oxford, excelling academically and becoming an ordained Anglican priest. At Oxford, he and his brother Charles formed what became known as the Holy Club. The Holy Club name was not his idea. Other students called it that. He hated that name. It was a group of friends committed to prayer, fasting, Bible study, and visiting the sick and imprisoned. Likewise, the term Methodist was initially a derisive nickname for their methodical spiritual practices of devotion and service. They were all searching for a perfect love.
Grab some coffee or something to eat. Let's talk.
Have you ever been part of a group of people that helped you perfect something or get better at something? What was it? And what was that perfecting method? Let's talk about it. John eventually traveled to the American colony of Georgia to evangelize natives and serve as a priest and missionary. During a harrowing sea crossing, like he thought he was going to die, John was really moved and impressed by a group of Moravians who displayed a peaceful and unwavering faith in the face of death. This was John's first real experience of people with a more perfect love compared to his own imperfect love. When John asked them where the security of their love came from, the Moravians pointed him to St. Paul's letter to the Romans. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. For ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. While John had big plans for being a missionary to the natives, he ended up primarily as a priest to the English colonists in Savannah. The church has a kind of gravity that pulls pastors back in on themselves. I know the pressure myself. During this time in Georgia, John encountered failure and spiritual dissatisfaction, and his strict methods alienated others. John did have a glimmer in his eye. He had a romantic but conflicted interest in Sophia Hopke. Sophia was the niece of one of the local magistrates who was really high up in the local government, just under the trustee or governor of Georgia. It's like a BBC period drama. Like any good drama, it had drama. John stalled in proposing, and Sophia married another man. John, feeling spurned, withheld communion from her and her new husband. Yikes! Sophia's uncle sued. He also presided over the local courts, so John absconded under the cover of darkness and through a swamp, boarded a ship, and sailed back to England with his tail between his legs. He had experienced another imperfect love. After returning to England and still searching for a perfect love, John attended a Moravian meeting on Aldersgate Street. While listening to Martin Luther, the German Protestant reformer's preface to the Epistle to the Romans, he felt his heart strangely warmed, experiencing assurance from God of his own salvation by grace through faith. The verse that was being read was, "For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." This strangely heartwarming moment at Aldersgate Street became a cornerstone for his theology of grace and personal conversion. Later that night, John wrote in his journal, "In the evening I went very unwillingly to a society in Aldersgate Street, where one was reading Luther's preface to the Epistle to the Romans. About 9:15, while he was describing the change which God works in the heart through faith in Christ, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust in Christ, Christ alone, for salvation, and an assurance was given me that He had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. John had found a more perfect love. Of course, he would waver back and forth at times from here on, but he had a taste of it.
So grab a drink and some food and let's chat.
Have you ever had an experience like Wesley's at Aldersgate? If so, describe it. If not, what effect do you think that kind of experience might have on you today? Let's talk about it. John decided to go out on a ledge and began preaching in open fields, often to coal miners, laborers, and the poor, those neglected by the established Church of England. He had a desire to help people find a more perfect love. John collaborated with the great open-air preacher and former actor George Whitefield. They both preached to massive crowds in the thousands in the fields. John also collaborated with his brother Charles Wesley, who wrote poetry as hymns, and Methodists became famous for their music. The renewal movement spread like wildfire. To understand the bigger historical currents, let's take a little side excursion through the history of the Church of England. Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church. Remember your history class in high school? To become what was essentially the Catholic Church of England. He executed a few dozen in the process, mainly for refusing to accept his authority as head of the church. Following Henry VIII was Edward VI, the Protestant. Edward persecuted or executed a few hundred Catholics. Next came Mary I, who was a Catholic. She got a drink named after her, the Bloody Mary. She executed over 280 Protestants during her reign. Then came Elizabeth I, who was a Protestant and developed the middle way between Catholicism and Protestantism. Nevertheless, she had several dozen Catholics and Puritans executed, though less than in previous reigns. James I was a Protestant with some Catholic influence and had 13 executions after the Guy Fawkes gunpowder plot. This is the King James of the King James Version of the Bible.
Are you getting the idea?
Catholic, Protestant, execution after execution after execution. Eventually, the mood in England was something like, don't get too excited about religion or faith. People will get killed. Faith became civil and perfunctory. Into this spiritual malaise, John said, no, heart faith is really important, and we don't have to kill people for it to be so. We can perfect our love. John began to organize believers into Methodist societies, classes, and bands for accountability and spiritual growth. This was a methodical approach to a more perfect love. He introduced lay preaching to his societies, a revolutionary concept that empowered ordinary people to spread the good news. Women weren't supposed to preach, so John began to methodically empower women to exhort.
That's just another word for preaching.
John and early Methodists also gave the pulpit to black preachers. All of this was revolutionary for his day. Unfortunately, it didn't all last past his death. John remained loyal to the Church of England, but faced criticism for his unorthodox methods. His emphasis on personal experience of faith and outreach to marginalized communities set him apart. His goal was to revive the Church of England, not start a new church or denomination. That didn't happen in England until 1795, 4 years after his death. It happened a little earlier in America in 1784, but amazingly a full year after the American Revolution had concluded. John and the Methodists after him were searching for a more perfect love.
So pull up a chair and let's sit down and talk.
John was trying to balance loyalty with change. How do you balance loyalty to a tradition with the need for change and renewal? Let's talk about it. John left a cultural and theological legacy, which is usually referred to by his last name, Wesley, or Wesleyan. One key theme in Wesleyan theology is grace, God's gift that brings about real transformation and perfects our love. Wesley detailed a kind of ladder or order of salvation. It begins with prevenient grace, when God works in your life before you even know it. Then comes justifying grace, which makes things right with you and God, pardon and forgiveness. Following justifying grace is sanctifying grace. That is a real change, to be more loving and just. Born-again grace happens with a spiritual birth and a new creation, and assuring grace is the internal confidence that you really are a beloved child of God. A grace that continues to work over and over is repenting grace. It's the work of grace turning from unloving and unjust attitudes and habits toward a loving and just heart and life. Grace continues with good works grace, perfecting our love in personal and communal spiritual practices. All of this is called a perfect love. It may be hard for many of us to believe, but Wesley believed that it was possible for each of us to really get to a perfect love in this lifetime. There's a lot of room for misunderstanding here, and quite often Wesley is greatly misunderstood. What a perfect love is, and is not, is what we'll explore in the following weeks. What John left behind now has a global reach called Methodism. John expanded the Methodist renewal movement by sending lay preachers to America, where Francis Asbury and Thomas Coke founded the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1784. They didn't rely on seminary-trained preachers like the more formal churches and denominations,
which had its strengths and weaknesses.
like preachers saying things that just weren't true. But by Wesley's death in 1791, Methodism had spread across England, Ireland, and America with over 100,000 followers. Methodism reached its zenith in America in the 1930s with 8 million members. Today, Methodism has a lot of branches, and the whole tree is called Pan-Methodism. Pan-Methodism has 80 million members worldwide, influencing education, healthcare, and social justice. All these Methodists are methodically seeking to perfect our love. Methodist contributions include founding schools, hospitals, and organizations like the United Methodist Committee on Relief, or UMCOR, which helps with disaster relief all over the world. John had a famous motto: do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, to all the people you can,
as long as ever you can.
Methodists challenge modern believers to integrate faith and action in their lives. Now that's a perfect love.
This has been Cooking with PT at the Parsonage. And remember, do all the dishes you can in all the ways you can for all the people you can whenever you can. All the dishes you can, all the ways you can, for all the people you can. This has been Cooking with PT at the Parsonage.